Thank you for joining us for the Shared Use Agreement webinar created by Penn State PRO Wellness. I am Krista Pattison, Project Manager with Penn State PRO Wellness, and I'm very excited to have you here to learn more about the benefits and the current research and resources surrounding shared use agreement development as a community organization here in Pennsylvania. In response to the Surgeon General's call to action, Ys across the U.S. have stepped up to advance walking and to make communities more walkable thanks to a grant provided to the YMCA of the USA from the Center of Disease Control and Prevention. YUSA has worked with 50 state alliances to encourage walking and other forms of active living throughout their states. While funding from the CDC, 50 state alliances have had the opportunity to receive walkability grant funding to complete deliverables that support the Surgeon General's call to action in support of walking. This builds on existing statewide efforts to promote walking and walkable communities. The Pennsylvania State Alliance has partnered with Penn State PRO Wellness for the development of a shared use agreement webinar training for local Ys to use with schools to enhance opportunities for walking in local communities. For some more background regarding the center itself, here at Penn State PRO Wellness, we are committed to educating and inspiring youth and their families to eat well, engage in regular physical activity, and become champions for bringing healthy choices to life. The vision of our center is to reduce the incidence of childhood obesity. We aim to be the trusted resource for educational programming, collaborative partnerships, and proven interventions in schools, communities, and like-minded organizations. We pride ourselves on being a great resource for schools as well as community organizations. Examples of our work can be found on our website, along with a number of educational materials and wellness resources. During today's session, we will start with an overview of shared use agreements and how important they are specifically here in Pennsylvania, and then expand with the benefits of shared use agreements and move on to the resources available to develop these agreements, some common barriers to shared use agreement development, as well as strategies to overcome these barriers. Finally, we will be looking at recent successes in the field with shared use agreements and YMCAs. At the end of this webinar, attendees should be able to recognize the shared use agreements as important obesity prevention strategies, understand the benefits of developing shared use agreements from the point of view of a community organization, and identify resources and strategies to develop a successful shared use agreement. Before we begin, I wanted to provide some context as to why shared use agreements can be beneficial to improving health in Pennsylvania. Here on the slide, you can see a map created from data collected by the U.S. Census Bureau in 2010. As you can see, the majority of the state, or 90% of Pennsylvania's state area, is classified as rural, while urban areas make up only 10% of Pennsylvania. Although most of the state's population is concentrated within the urban counties of Pennsylvania near major cities like Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, it is important to consider how the rural makeup of Pennsylvania can impact our community's health, especially in relation to physical activity levels. If we look at the most recent statistics on physical activity, 75% of Pennsylvania youth are not physically active daily, meaning they do not receive the recommended 60 minutes of physical activity every day. And for adults, 52.2% do not engage in the recommended 150 minutes of physical activity per week. These statistics are a clear indication that Pennsylvania's children and families are physically inactive according and based on national standards. We know that as a state, as we've mentioned, Pennsylvania is primarily made up of rural communities. And at the same time, we know that the majority of Pennsylvanians are physically inactive. This phenomenon is not unique to Pennsylvania, and in fact, research has shown that rural adults are less likely to engage in leisure time physical activity than their urban counterparts. Research has offered an explanation for this rural versus urban difference by connecting the environmental factors present in rural communities with lack of physical inactivity. Research indicates that factors like poor quality, limited availability, and inadequate access to recreational facilities, as well as isolated conditions with limited transportation options can be used to explain the lack of physical activity seen in rural areas when compared to urban ones. In other words, rural communities may be less likely to have usable sidewalks, and while they may have parks, these parks are perhaps inadequately equipped or unsafe, all of which can impact the physical activity levels in rural communities. The public health world has been trying to figure out how to address this lack of accessibility for physical activity in rural communities in order to increase physical activity levels and address the disparity between rural and urban communities. The CDC has offered a solution. It recommends the use of shared use agreements to increase opportunities for physical activity. By using shared use agreements, communities will have increased access to recreational facilities, which will increase their opportunity for physical activity as well as enhance their community's walkability. Increasing the walkability of a neighborhood or community is a way to encourage community members to adopt a physical, active lifestyle in a feasible and manageable way. The development of shared use agreements provides the space for public to participate in a variety of physical activities, including walking, and can even encourage walking to and from open facilities. Shared use agreements are defined as formal agreements between government entities or community organizations outlining the shared use of facilities or properties. The example that is often used is an agreement between a public school and a city or county that allows schools to unlock their playground after school hours and on the weekends for members in the communities to use. However, these agreements can occur between many different types of entities. And during this webinar, we will focus on the use of agreements between school and community organizations, such as the YMCA. The overall purpose of shared use agreements is to open or expand access to already existing facilities for community use. And due to shared use agreement potential for increasing community access to recreational space, public health officials have identified the creation of shared use agreements as a strategy to prevent childhood obesity and improve community health overall. In terms of the benefits of developing a shared use agreement for communities and organizations involved, we just mentioned that shared use agreements can be used as a strategy for preventing childhood obesity, as well as improving communities' health. By opening up recreational facilities such as playgrounds and gyms, the community now has increased opportunity for physical activity. This physical activity can be in the form of families taking walks along the running track, children playing on the playground, or it can be in the form of after-school programs where children can partake in organized physical activity hosted by local organizations or groups. The health benefits from having this increased access to recreational spaces are enormous. For one, people who live near recreational spaces are more likely to be physically active. This makes logical sense, but it's also supported by research. With increased physical activity comes a reduced risk of chronic diseases, which are on the rise, especially in rural areas. In addition, living near parks or recreational facilities has been shown to have a positive impact on both mental health and well-being. If we look to the community side and how the community itself and partnering organizations may benefit from shared use agreements, we see that partnerships between community organizations and schools can enhance community engagement. By creating these long-term relationships with the community, organizations can create stronger community ties through increased interaction and organized activity. The activities that are generated as part of these partnerships can promote volunteerism, further strengthening community engagement. In addition, there is decreased crime, vandalism, and violence in recreational spaces that residents are using in a regular basis. So by establishing these partnerships and regular activities, community organizations can help create safer communities. On top of all of this, choosing to use facilities that are already in existence maximizes their benefit as a low-cost community organization. So shared use agreement can be a very cost-effective approach for community organizations that need to increase the space they have available to run their programs. Now that we have talked about the wide variety of benefits that may come from creating a shared use agreement, we are going to move on to cover the resources and materials that exist to help in the actual creation of shared use agreements. This task can often be daunting, especially for organizations that feel they do not have the legal expertise to draft such a document. But there are a number of great resources available to help you through the process. To begin, Change Lab Solutions, which is a nonprofit that aims to create healthier communities through law and policy, has developed a checklist to outline the elements of shared use agreements that come before the writing process, such as creating support that organizations may not have considered otherwise, as well as things to consider when drafting the document itself. This makes the checklist a great resource and a great place to get started. It is available on their website and can be accessed using the link shown on the slide. In addition, Change Lab has developed a model agreement specifically for nonprofit partnerships that can be used as a guide when drafting the actual document. This model, along with others, can be found on their website using the link shown on the slide. The creation of shared use agreements does require some time and commitment, but it is clear that the benefits far outweigh these costs. From past experience and case studies, we know that there are some common barriers that organizations and schools encounter as they create shared use agreements. So we are going to go through these common barriers and provide a few examples of ways to overcome them to ensure a successful shared use agreement. The first common barrier we would like to address is scheduling. School administrators and their partners have identified scheduling as a main barrier to allowing community use of school facilities. Therefore, it is important for schools and their partners to establish an effective and easy-to-use scheduling system to track organized activities and the use of facilities to ensure that the school has access to these facilities when needed. This may include things such as in-service days or school team practices, and this helps to avoid confusion and frustrations that arise from scheduling conflicts. To address this need for an organized scheduling system, schools and their partners need to create a scheduling system that is centralized and accessible for all parties involved. This can take many forms, but schools should work with their partners to determine what method works best for them. Partners can use anything from an Excel spreadsheet to scheduling software that syncs all events into one calendar system. Use of this system will facilitate communication between building staff and partners to ensure that facilities are accessible and ready to use when needed. Along the same lines, communication has been identified as a key barrier in the creation of shared use agreements. In order to ensure effective communication between the two partners, a communication protocol should be established. The partners will need to identify the employees within each agency that will act as leaders in the creation of the shared use agreement and throughout its terms. The partner should consider who will be responsible for communicating to the other party about agreement matters, and also who will be responsible for decision making in regard to the agreement. Within this protocol, it would also be useful to establish a process for resolving disagreements when they arise. A third barrier that is commonly cited as a concern, it includes the costs associated with increased use of the facilities. This can be addressed through a cost-sharing provision in the agreement itself that allows the two parties to share costs associated with maintenance, cleaning, and supervision. In reality, previous research has indicated that an increased utilization of facilities does not increase costs in any significant way. One study found no significant association between shared use facilities and operating costs. And another study analyzed shared use agreements in Los Angeles, estimated that the cost shared use agreement is approximately 38 cents per community member using the facility. One way to cut operating costs even further is to concentrate use of the facilities to one specific area. For example, a school may require that an organization centralize their activities to the gymnasium or surrounding hallways and block off the rest of the school from use as a way to cut down on staffing costs and facility costs. If possible, you may even consider conducting a financial analysis to obtain solid numbers and to ease concerns in regard to costs. Lastly, safety is another common concern that acts as a barrier to shared use agreement development. Concerns about safety are often related to liability, as organizations and schools are worried about who will be responsible if someone is injured. We will go more into detail on liability in the next section, but for now we will cover strategies to increase safety at the shared facilities. To begin, the facilities and its users should be supervised by staff. Some organizations find it most useful to use school staff as supervisors, as they are most familiar with the facilities and therefore know the resources available on site as well as the limitations of the facility itself. If schools do centralize the activities occurring in their facilities to a specific location, that also acts as a way to limit the area that's needed to be supervised and therefore can also increase safety. So now we will dig a little deeper into liability here in Pennsylvania and how it can be addressed as to not stop organizations from creating shared use agreements. In general, research has found that fears over liability in the context of shared use agreements are exaggerated. A survey of the laws in all 50 states concluded that even though there may be real liability risk associated with shared use agreements, these risks are unlikely to be substantial enough to justify denying recreational access to children who are at risk of obesity. Essentially, schools who are only expected to take all action to reasonably prevent injury. So in Pennsylvania, like all other states, there is a legislation that protects schools from liability as long as they uphold a reasonable care standard. In fact, state law here in Pennsylvania encourages the opening of facilities among schools. From the point of view of community organization, risk can be limited through insurance. Large nonprofit organizations such as the YMCA have their own insurance that can be used to limit risk and liability. Now that we have discussed the barriers, we're going to turn next to the research to see what factors have been identified that contribute to creating a successful shared use agreement. Number one is the deliberate formation and continued maintenance of relationships. A positive relationship is at the heart of all shared use agreements. There should be a concerted effort to establish and maintain this relationship throughout the development process, as well as the terms of agreement. This requires open communication between the two partners, which is where communication protocol can be extremely useful. In addition, it is important that partners are willing to compromise and are flexible in their agreement as to create the best agreement for both sides. The second factor research has identified as key to creating a successful shared use agreement is having a shared vision. At the very beginning stages of shared use agreement, a vision should be established between the two partners to ensure that both sides are on the same page. Partners should consider what they think the values of a shared use agreement are and how they think such an agreement should be implemented. And lastly, in order to create a successful shared use agreement, research has indicated that it is important that you ensure that you are creating mutually beneficial agreements. Oftentimes, schools are reluctant to create shared use agreements because they are unable to see equal benefits from an agreement as they perceive community groups or organizations using their facilities, but the school may not feel as though they are gaining much in return. Therefore, it should be ensured that shared use agreement outlines any benefits that the school may gain. For example, in one case study, the principal of a school saw not only the opportunities for children to be active and involved in after-school activities as a benefit of developing an agreement, but also that the partnership created throughout the agreement could help offset some maintenance costs the school would have trouble covering without such an agreement. Therefore, the school was also benefiting from keeping its facility in top condition with a limited budget through the agreement. Any such benefits, therefore, should be clear to all parties to encourage agreement. While these factors are important to consider in the development of shared use agreements itself, experiences from across the country have shown that organizations may also consider the community members that are ultimately going to benefit from such an agreement as they use the now open facilities. Therefore, community engagement becomes a crucial factor in the maintenance of a successful shared use agreement through continued assessment of the effectiveness of the agreement and how it is playing out in reality. Schools and their partners can engage with community members in ways to assess programs to create new ones based on community needs. For example, schools can ask for feedback from community members on programs, policies, and procedures so that the community is able to share what is working and what is not, which will inform adjustments to the agreement and ensure that it's a best fit for community needs, as the community benefit is at the heart of any shared use agreement. More formally, community members can serve as community representatives on school committees or task forces as guidelines and policies are updated. Community engagement is also important in respect that the schools and their partners want the community to be aware of the agreement and making use of the new activities or programs that are available within their community. Shared use agreements can only benefit the community to the extent to which they are being used. So ensuring the community is engaged with the process of assessment and development will encourage them to also make use of the agreement because it is operating in a way that the community has helped establish. We will end this webinar with an example of an agreement between a community organization, the YMCA, and a school that applied these factors and developed a successful shared use agreement with their community. The YMCA of the East Bay in California is a prime example for how community organizations can develop shared use agreements with its local schools. The YMCA has a total of over 45 shared use agreements with school districts in the area that outline programs ranging from soccer camps to swimming lessons to general after-school programs. Oftentimes, these agreements make it so the school grounds are effectively a YMCA site after school hours. Granted, the YMCA of the East Bay is located in a particularly urban area, but this case is still a valuable example as the organization has come up with an effective model in creating these agreements and has extensive experience from which we can learn. In the experience of this particular YMCA, they found that their two most challenging barriers to creating shared use agreements were liability concerns and staffing. The YMCA developed strategies to overcome these barriers that may be applicable to your own organization as you begin creating such an agreement. First, to address liability concerns, the YMCA of the East Bay uses a formula to assess liability for a specific site and program. This formula considers factors such as the level of physical activity, equipment involved, adult to child ratio, program duration, and frequency of the program in the assessment of its risk. According to the YMCA's executive director, it is important that the organization assess risk in this way because the YMCA is self-insured and wishes to limit liability as much as possible in any agreement that it enters. The other challenge that the YMCA often faces is staffing. The main issue with staffing for the YMCA is answering questions like who will staff the facility after school hours, and to what extent will the result in extra work. To address these issues, the YMCA prefers the use of existing unionized school staff to supervise its programs because they are most familiar with the facilities and building. The YMCA then pays the school staff the unionized wage, which helps to build a successful partnership by creating equal enthusiasm on both sides of the agreement. The YMCA of East Bay focuses heavily on how to maintain a positive relationship with the school it enters agreements with. And as research shows, and we have went over a few times in a couple slides ago, the number one factor in creating a successful shared use agreement is the deliberate formation and maintenance of relationships. The YMCA clearly applies this concept to its own work. According to the executive director of the YMCA, one way they build relationships and commitment is by paying close attention to and appreciating the school's concerns. He says, quote, "We will think about how the agreement can benefit the school and its students," end quote. So thinking about programs that are most beneficial to the school and their goals can go a long way in creating a positive relationship that goes beyond a landlord-tenant relationship to one that is truly transforms the role the school plays in the community. In summary, shared use agreements can be used as an effective strategy to combat physical inactivity in the state of Pennsylvania and is in fact a strategy that is recommended by the CDC. In terms of developing such agreements, many resources and models exist that can help overcome common barriers and create a successful shared use agreement. Shared use agreements are beneficial to the community and the organizations involved for many reasons, which are related to health, community engagement, safety, and programming. And these benefits certainly outweigh the time and commitment required to make them. We want to end with a list of helpful websites that are full of resources to help you create shared use agreements. We already highlighted the resources created by ChangeLab Solutions, like the checklist and the model agreement, but here are many other resources available on there. They have many other resources on their website. And additional websites created by KC Healthy Kids, as well as active living research. So be sure to refer to these sites as you begin creating your own shared use agreement. And finally, we would like to say thank you for participating in this webinar. We hope that you found the information and resources were beneficial as you create your own shared use agreement. Please feel free to contact me, Krista Pattison, at Penn State PRO Wellness, with any questions and any comments that you might have. I thank you, and I hope you all have a great day.